everybody. I'm Ken Ray, host of macOS Ken. That's Adam Christianson. Say hi, Adam.
Hey, how's everybody doing? I'm host of Maccast.
So Linda was kind enough to ask me many months ago if I would do this. And I said, yeah, sure. And she said, great. Do you want to do it next month or 4 months from now? And I said, let's do 4 months from now. And then, so when we were talking about what we're going to do, since this is the last one for the year, Linda actually suggested that we hit some of the biggest stories of 2021 for Apple. Well, the thing is, I do a lot of like business stuff and sort of, societal, I think, around Apple. And I'm not the guy you want to talk to about hardware at all. So I asked Adam if he would join us, and he was kind enough to. So we're going to bounce back and forth between some of that, sort of softer side, I suppose, and then some of the hardware as well. Thought it would be fun actually to start with a couple of guys that I like. Piper Jaffray, former Piper Jaffray analyst Gene Munster. He's now the principal of Loop Ventures, and TF International analyst Ming-Chi Kuo. Both had these things that were in the very first macOS Ken of 2021, where they made predictions for 2021, which it turns out was an impossible year about which to make predictions. And yet they sort of did okay. So let's go through some of Gene Munster's really quickly. He said that Apple would benefit from the accelerating digital transformation. His whole thing was our dependency on tech is accelerated because of the pandemic, while the velocity of this adoption may ease post-pandemic. Were we ever so young? Sorry. Well, it might,
we're
ease
almost there.
I know, right? Yeah, and then again. Our view is that much of the change is sustainable moving forward, is what he said. I mean, and what he's talking about is absolutely right. Even when people started to go back to work in the middle of the summer, there were still a lot of offices that were like, yeah, we're done with the whole coming back to work thing. There were lots of people that went hybrid as well, lots of places that went hybrid. So obviously Apple's hardware is going to keep being cherry as far as the work from home crew. He said that we should expect fiscal year 2022 street estimates to inch higher. Linda mentioned this a moment ago. This is absolutely happening right now. People are raising their price targets as high as $210 in some cases for reasons that are half of it's iPhone and Mac and adoption of hardware that's out there right now. And then half of it is the rumors that Linda was talking about, which we'll talk about too. 5G to initiate multi-year iPhone upgrade cycle. Can I ask you a question, Adam?
Yeah.
Would you know the difference between an upgrade cycle for iPhone at this point? Because it seems like
it's hard to tell. I mean, it used to be the solid every 2 years because we had the S phones, but now we don't. So it gets much more confusing and muddled.
Right, especially because now you've got people holding onto their phones for so long. Who is it? It's Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives says, generally speaking, there's anywhere between 250 million and 300 million iPhones that are ripe for upgrade. And they're only a billion, but I mean, there's a billion divided by 3 is like 333 million, right?
Right.
So you're constantly in a place where 1/3 of your audience is ready for more. And so how you can say this is kicked in the upgrade cycle, or it's a year that ends in a number. Munster also predicted new business segments. He was thinking specifically about hardware and services as a subscription bundle, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I feel like things like Business Essentials from Apple. There was another program they just introduced a couple of weeks ago, I think, that had that same feeling. The other new business segment that he was talking about was either the car or transportation. He was not saying that either of those things were going to happen in 2021. He was, however, saying that Wall Street was going to start paying attention to those things, which is what we talked about a minute ago with Wall Street sort of anticipating a better 2022. You also had, I think I talk about this in a bit, or going to talk about this in a bit, but you had Morgan Stanley analyst Katie Huberty issue a note earlier this week. I think that's down here somewhere, so I'm not going to do that quite yet. She's basically saying, yeah, okay, everything that Apple is already doing is great, but we need to start thinking about the stuff that Apple is going to do, because there are things that we know they're going to do, even though we don't know it, but we all do. and, pay no attention to the actual Apple television, which we also all knew everybody can't be right all the time. As far as TF International analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, his hardware predictions included the long-awaited Airtags item trackers, which Adam is going to talk about more in depth in a bit, an unspecified augmented reality device, which, he was wrong about the year, but as I said earlier, it was easy to be wrong about 2021. We'll talk more about the AR thing in a bit, because that somehow, despite the fact that it doesn't exist, is one of the biggest stories of 2021, I think. He also said new AirPods, some more Apple Silicon Macs, which Adam is going to talk about that in a bit, and Apple's first mini LED displays throughout the year. So that's the kind of thing that we were looking for this year. What's funny is the only mention in any of that about COVID is when we're done with it. And it's kind of a bummer that we have to talk about it, but that's, I personally think, one of the biggest stories for Apple of 2022. We discussed whether we wanted to, count up to, let's start with a small story and end with the biggest, but then you're ending with COVID, and that's no way to say happy holidays, everybody. So we'll go ahead and get the ugly one out of the way. I say ugly. It feels to me, and I want to ask you again as well, Adam,
Sure.
they're like nailing the pre-recorded presentation at this point. Like I know there are people who, would fly out and would be invited, and they're all happy to see each other, and they're all happy to be in the room, and they're all happy to go and, touch the thing as soon as it's all over. The thing being the product that they announce, not, it's not like a Blarney Stone in Cupertino or something. I never want to go back to that. I love the pre-recorded presentations because you get all of the information. It just zips along. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your thought on it?
The efficiency. Well, personally, I was never invited before anyway, so
Yeah, me neither.
you and
Yeah.
we're always virtual. But yeah, no, I feel like it's much more polished. We get a lot more of the information, a lot more directly, and God, Apple does a really good job of it.
Mhm.
It's just a shame that they built an entire theater dedicated to Steve Jobs and it hasn't seen much use.
Did they?
So I do hope they get back to that. Like I do. I think what we might see is a mix at some point in the future. Like a little bit of pre-done and a little bit of in person. I do hope we get back to that someday, because we all know like connecting physically and directly is much better than the virtual stuff at the end of the day.
Well, social distancing since 2008 is, what I say. But so then talk to me about WWDC, because that's kind of the same thing. I mean, on the one hand, and I know there is nothing like being in the halls. I mean, I know, I'm not a developer. I know there's nothing like being in the halls with all those people and running into somebody and overhearing somebody and talking about that. At the same time, what did you have? Like 5,000 people at most could go to WWDC, and now it's however many millions, have an account and want to sit down and watch.
Right. I mean, there you go. There's a good example of a hybrid model that seems to work well, right? I mean, maybe not everybody's totally thrilled with it if you want to actually be there, but
yeah,
I think it proves the theory that it can work.
As far as the work from home thing, and Apple and COVID, they seem to have done fairly well with that. I know there are lots of people who are upset about coming back in. I have a friend who works for Apple retail, and I don't think he has seen the inside of a retail store in quite a while. The work he does, he is actually mostly doing from home, although I think around the time of the iPhone launch, he did have to go back in for a bit. Apple's actually opened several new stores throughout this year. I had the good fortune of being able to actually get my picture taken with Tim Cook at the Tower Theater location in LA, which was it's a beautiful location, which I don't intend to go to again anytime soon. They also opened a new store in the Grove, which I got to go to, which is, it's amazing like how different the stores are. I mean, there are so many things that are exactly the same, but those two stores architecturally couldn't be any more different. When I heard that they'd opened one, if you don't know what the Grove is, it's basically an outdoor mall. And it's like, okay, great. It's another mall Apple store. And it's honestly, if it wins an award next year for its architecture, I won't be surprised, because it feels like, it doesn't feel like you're in a mall. It doesn't feel like you're in Southern California. I don't know what it feels like, but kind of incredible. So that they've been able to keep doing that. The big story probably is Apple's ability to execute in these weird times, especially when you have the supply chain issues, especially when you have the chip shortages and things like that. And in thinking about that for tonight, the thing that I thought about was actually something that happened in 2005. Apple in 2005, when I was first doing Apple News for Inside Mac, locked up 3 years of Flash. And at the time, all they were using Flash for was, I believe, the iPod Shuffle and maybe the iPod Nano. Why did they need 3 years of Flash? It didn't make any sense to me. And I kept walking around and bugging people I knew who were interested in Apple and saying, why are they locking up 3 years of Flash? Well, it
I
turns
think
out
you
they were
asked
locking up,
me.
yeah, they were locking up 3 years of Flash for the iPhone, it turns out, because the iPhone launched in 2007 and doing a 3-year deal for Flash in 2005 got them through 2008. So that got them through the iPhone 3G. They were making deals for a thing that we didn't even know existed. And Flash, I don't know if anybody remembers, but at the time it was back and forth where it was not available, it was too expensive. People who make it would glut the market with it, and then suddenly they were practically giving it away in breakfast cereal. So executing in weird times is a thing that Apple knows how to do, but there's nothing as weird as, you know, what's going on now as far as supply chain and stuff. It's really great that Apple can throw its weight around. I mean, I say throw its weight around like it's bad. I mean, they are the biggest customer on the planet. When the biggest customer on the planet comes and says, hey, I'm going to need more of this, if you've got more of that, you're probably going to give it to them. And if the second biggest customer says, hey, that was mine, I mean, it's, you know, kind of a drag, and I'm kind of sorry. The question is, can Apple keep executing? Not because is something going to go wrong with Apple, but eventually you run out of finite material. So are the chip shortages going to come back around to a place where it's not hurting what Apple is trying to put out? It's interesting that Apple chose to, we think Apple chose to throw the iPad under the bus for this holiday season. They actually said on the last earnings call, on the fourth quarter earnings call for fiscal year 2021, that all of their products were going to do great except for iPad. iPad was going to lose sales. Numbers were going to go down on iPad because they weren't going to have enough to go around. And it seemed kind of weird that they could know that, except then they were just like, we're going to have all the iPhones you're ever going to need. We're going to have all the Macs you're ever going to need. We're sacrificing. They did not say that they were sacrificing iPad for that. It's just iPad is the one thing where they know they're going to fall. And conjecture is that the reason that's falling is because they've sacrificed components and who knows, maybe even work capacity to keep making iPhones. Or is there something else coming? That's the one weird thing, because Linda mentioned the AR thing earlier. There are some people who say we're going to get an AR announcement in spring. TF International analyst Ming-Chi Kuo actually says that we're not going to get that now until the fall or maybe even the winter. But Apple locked up 3 years of Flash a year and a half before they needed as much Flash as they locked up. Are we sacrificing iPad for iPhone, or is that the kind of deal that Apple would have gone ahead and made in, you know, March or June, knowing what September and December were going to be like? And did iPad get sacrificed for something else? That's just wild conjecture, excuse me. But yeah, that's kind of the COVID thing. It started off being about COVID. It's hard to keep it all, you know, apart. At the same time, though, I mentioned Apple has done an amazing job of executing on hardware, which, you know, I know nothing about. Thank God Adam Christianson is here.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into hardware for a little bit, I think, and talk about kind of the big stories for Apple in 2021 from the hardware side. And I think there's no doubt that we kind of have to start with the hardware transition to Apple Silicon. And it's amazing to me, and probably to a lot of you, because I realize we've now been through 3 transitions, 4 different processors. And Apple is about a year into their 2-year transition, what they said would be a 2-year transition to Apple Silicon. And they've given us some incredible very exciting hardware. I would argue to say that like this is one of the most exciting times to be a Mac person. And I don't think many people would disagree with me. And what's interesting to me about this transition too is it marks our return to RISC processing with the ARM. Now, Apple licenses the ARM instruction set from ARM Holdings out of the UK. And they actually design their own processors. So what we're dealing with is, licensing an instruction set. Apple actually designs all of their own processors, and most of them are made and manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. And that relationship has been obviously very fruitful for Apple. Started with the A series processors, and now we have the M1 system processors, the system on a chip designs, combining CPUs, GPUs, IO controllers, ISPs, neural engines, security chips, all in a single architecture. They have the unified memory architecture. All of this stuff going to facilitate basically what Apple wants to do with their hardware, and where they were sort of held back or maybe limited by some of the other companies. They had a great relationship with Intel, but they realized with what they wanted to do with their designs, things like that, incredible performance with incredible power efficiency, and not, keeping with the Steve Jobs mantra of wanting to not have massive cooling systems and fans. They realized they kind of needed to branch out on their own. And I mean, they really started this transition years ago, maybe even decades ago, planning this out, hiring engineers and the staff. And it's really proven this year to be incredible. I mean, we had the M1s last year, but this year they came out with the Pro versions of those processors, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, which just took things to a whole new level. So you've got 70% faster CPU performance than the M1. You've got a 10-core CPU design, 8 high-performance cores, 2 high-efficiency cores. Interestingly, the same CPU in both the Pro and the Max processors, which is easy to forget about because the performance is so different, but that really comes down to the GPU side of things. So you've got up to 32 core GPUs in the Max. They really ramped up the RAM, a big complaint, I guess, of the original M1s. Well, if you could levy a complaint against an incredible processor coming to the Mac was, you were limited to 16 gigs of RAM. Apple ramped that up this year with the Pro and the Max to up to 64 gigs of RAM. Also increased the memory bandwidth in that processor design, so incredibly fast, 200 gigabits for the Pro, gigabits per second for the Pro, 400 gigabits per second for the Max. And then of course they recognized their market for these processors, video professionals, YouTubers, all this sorts of things, and took the processing for video, not only containing acceleration for MPEG video, but moving that to ProRes, right? Apple's ProRes. So you've got ProRes accelerators in both processors, a single in the Pro and duals in the Max. So just super exciting time for Apple hardware. And so the processors, I think, really were the star of the show. But related to that, we saw a bunch of uses for those processors, right? We saw a bunch of great Mac hardware. And like I said at the beginning, I think it's super exciting time to be a Mac fan. And it felt for many years with iPhones and iPads like the Mac was maybe a little bit left behind. But they kicked things off early in the year with a great new redesign of the iMac. I don't know if any of you have the 24-inch iMac. I have a hard time not buying one, even though I probably don't need one, just because they're beautiful, great colors. They leveraged the M1 architecture that Apple introduced with the 13-inch MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, and Mac Mini. So 8-core CPUs, 8-core GPUs, great performance, that up to 16 gigs of RAM. What was amazing about the iMac design is I think it really realized the sort of design goal of kind of having a single sheet of glass. They're incredibly thin, 11.5 millimeters. They brought the MagSafe connector, which was an interesting decision, to the iMac, and brought really innovative things like the Ethernet port on moving that to the power brick so that it wasn't on the machine. Because literally, once you move that thin, you have issues like you just don't have the space. The headphone jack is, of course, on the bottom of the display because the headphone 3.5 millimeter headphone jack is actually too deep to fit in the thin architecture of the iMac. So cool new designs, great new system, and that was like right at the beginning of 2021. And then, of course, they followed that up later in the year in the fall with the anticipated update of the Pro systems using those M1 Pro, M1 Max chips with the 14-inch, 16-inch MacBook Pros. That's where they introduced another thing. I think, Ken, I can't remember if you mentioned this, but this was in the early predictions for the analysts that Apple would be moving to mini LED technology. So this is where we see the introduction of well, I guess we really saw it earlier with the iPad Pro, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but really the move to what Apple calls their Liquid Retina XDR display, mini LED backlighting with dimming zones, which again helps with the power efficiency and performance of the displays. Also bringing the 120 hertz variable refresh rate, another technology that is really centered around providing power efficiency and performance. So you get great scrolling capabilities, but it adapts so that it can use less power when you're not scrolling around as much. It really adds to battery life and performance. And another thing about the Pros that was super exciting this year was bringing back and really listening to the Pro community about ports and what they need in these machines. So a lot of people know with the earlier models, like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, like I have, Apple went to just simply Thunderbolt USB-C ports, and that didn't really serve the professional market as much as they wanted. Pros want things like HDMI ports, SD card slots. MagSafe was a huge loss, and all of that stuff returned in 2021, which was super exciting. And seems like a silly thing, but a big one for me was finally introducing a true 1080p FaceTime camera on their Pro systems. The fact that they didn't have that was kind of crazy. And of course, with all that performance, you get great battery life, 21 hours of battery life. And so really, again, I think we have some of the best Macs this year that we've ever seen, and it's creating a lot of buzz and excitement. So kind of what's next, just looking briefly into 2022, we're expecting M1 MacBook Pros, and essentially what it's looking like that's going to be is basically doubling the M1 Max and quadrupling the M1 Max. So we're talking things like 20 core CPUs, 64 core GPUs, or even 40 core CPUs and 128 core GPUs. So just incredible I can't even imagine with the performance of the current systems. It's almost unfathomable to think where the machines are going in 2022. And then we're also expecting, of course, a 27-inch version of the iMac. Some people are calling it the iMac Pro. It may be the first system where Apple introduced kind of the next generation, faster clocked version of the M1 processor, the M2. So that's everything that's happening with Mac. I know, Ken, you're not a Mac person, but like, how can you not be sort of just jazzed up about
I'm a Mac person, dude. I'm talking to you on a Mac right now.
Well, I mean, like, you're not a hardware person, you've said.
I'm not a hardware person, that's
like,
true.
This stuff gets me going. I don't know about other people in the group here, but like, I get super excited about this stuff.
Here's the thing, and I actually wanted to ask you about that. Like, how do you convince somebody? Because I don't have a hard time convincing somebody who's been using a Chromebook or just like whatever, less than stellar Windows machine, that a Mac is what they want to use. And I will tell them it's going to take them usually a few weeks before they're really as comfortable in front of that machine as they are in front of another. But I can give you a million reasons why you'd want a Mac. Where I start to get a little confused is, like, so who needs a Mac and who needs a Mac Pro? Because there are lots of people who think, well, I need a Mac Pro because, I'm a pro. And it's like, well, what are you a pro at? Like, well, I'm really good at checking email and going to Facebook. I mean, but the thing is, well, I'm sorry. I'm excited about it in theory. I always want the best thing that's going to be the thing that I need for me. But I bought a MacBook Pro the last time because I thought I might get into video, and I got into video a tiny bit, and then I got out of it again. And I'm not dissatisfied with this machine, but I don't get as excited as you. But then what's funny is I'm glad you brought up the possibility of a Mac Pro, because I had you on one of my shows and I think I basically said something to the effect of, okay, so what does that give us? And I thought I could hear your head explode because you seem to think that I was saying I don't get it. And what I was really saying was I don't get it, but not like not in a I don't understand why anybody would want that. More of a I'm like a goldfish staring at a piano. I don't know
Right.
what that kind of what that kind of architecture would maybe do for me, I guess is sort of my thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think the kinds of people that are getting excited about this are, people working in academia, science, technology. You're talking about folks who are maybe developers or programmers. You're talking about folks who are in Hollywood, right? And what it gives them, of course, is not sitting around waiting for render things to happen, or to be able to realize your creative vision in real time, where you kind of can't today, right? So I think even us as podcasters, we can relate to that, right? Or anybody can relate to that. Anybody who's seen a spinning beach ball or a progress bar on their machine can kind of relate to that. Now, where you fall in that continuum, right, is a whole different story. And I think you have hit the nail on the head, right? It's just like, it's amazing to think that our consumer level machines are now basically something that pros would have dreamed about even a year or two ago, right?
Yeah.
And so like that's the exciting part about the hardware to me. And actually that's a great transition into like the last thing that I want to talk about that relates to hardware in 2021, but in this kind of section is the M1 chip coming to the iPad Pro, right? So that was the other thing, is like the M series processor is basically, based on the same technology, same design concepts and systems as the A series, same instruction set, because of the power efficiency, because of all of those reasons that make it a great Mac processor. Apple also, decided, hey, this makes a great iPad processor as well. And so we saw the M1 going into an iPad, and where that sort of relates to what we're talking about is it kind of has unrealized potential, because it's really now up to the developers to figure out how to push the iPad to the next level. And that sort of opens up the ability for them to do that. Again, they added other technologies like the mini LED display, the Liquid Retina XDR display, 120 hertz refresh rate. A big one for the iPad Pro this year too was bringing 5G, which 5G is going to be the big thing in 2022 to drive iPhone sales, especially on the lower market. We're expecting an update to the SE2. Apple replaced the Lightning connector on the iPad with Thunderbolt, so it's really moving the iPad more into that realm of being more like a desktop system, a Mac, but it's still an iPad and it's got all those things. And they introduced some new technologies that haven't even made it to the Mac yet, which I'm a little disappointed about. Things like Center Stage with the wide angle FaceTime camera. So lots of exciting things happening this year in Mac hardware and iPad hardware, I guess, too. Just all centered around Apple Silicon.
Are they ever gonna just go ahead and start calling the processor in the iPhone Pro and iPhone Pro Max M whatever? Is it going to be powered by the M1?
That is a great question, right? I mean, it has the potential. I think right now the differentiating factor is, as much as, yes, the M1 is incredibly power efficient and power performant, to really push it to its limits, it still requires some active cooling, right? So we still have fans. They don't come on in our MacBook Pros, but as frequently. But if you're really pushing them, they do. And I guarantee you, like when we get to the dual and the quad that we're going to see in the Mac Pros, there's going to be some serious cooling systems in there, and you just don't have the space or capability to do that currently in iPhone. But will they change that naming? That remains to be seen. I think they'll keep it separate for a little while, but yeah, I could see it merge at some point.
It sounds like a great way to start selling more accessories, though. It's a MagSafe case with a fan, maybe, or You put it in the freezer and then you take it out and you go. All right. So for my next bit, I wanted to talk about actually two things that Linda talked about in her news this week. And it's kind of crazy to think about how, like, once something becomes news for Apple, it's just going to stay news for a very long time. I wanted to talk together about the NSO group story and the expanded protections for children. They're not really the same story, but I'm gonna fudge it and say they are for two reasons. First of all, Adam and I had divided stuff up, and I had more than he did, so I'm making this one. But the other reason is because I really think that both of those actually sort of made consumers stop and think about not only all of the information they have on their phones, but how that information might be accessed by someone else, or what people might be able to learn from it. And like Linda said, I'm sorry, I keep saying like Linda said, and I realize that people who are watching the recording did not hear what Linda said, so I apologize. Earlier, before we started, Linda was doing a news story about the NSO group, and she said, listen, you're not a target of this, because you're not. Unless you are a captain of industry, a politician, an activist, or a journalist, you're not a target of this. And then most of those people are also not targets from this either. But NSO Group had a piece of software called Pegasus, and Pegasus is a zero-click bit of spyware. The user doesn't have to do anything, or the target rather doesn't have to do anything. It's always relied before on either having physical access to the phone or tricking that person into downloading something, clicking on a link, doing something like that. And now all of a sudden, you didn't have to do that. Now, Apple's senior vice president of software engineering, Craig Federighi, said, look, they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars doing this. And so that tells you two things. First of all, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And second, it's not happening to you because of the millions and millions and millions of dollars, as we say. NSO Group says they would never sell to anybody who would do anything wrong. The problem is they're governments, and they're selling to governments. And sometimes governments do things that we don't all like, including going after people who are protesting against the government, or going after people who are reporting on the government. Sometimes members of a government have been going after other members of the government using Pegasus. When I say I don't mean here in the States, as far as we know. I mean, probably not. Certainly you'd like to think, but we don't really know. So Apple is suing NSO Group to stop them from being able to do that and use it. They're not only trying to get them to stop using Pegasus, they're trying to get them to stop using any Apple software or hardware at all, to make sure they just keep their mitts off of it. I kind of like the fact that when Apple, because they're not just suing to stop them, they're also suing for restitution, but they're going to take that restitution and give it to organizations that are researching and finding out this information. It's a bit disappointing to find out that it wasn't Apple that found out about Pegasus. It was Amnesty International, and I cannot remember the other organization, but there's a security side.
Probably the researchers at Citizen Lab, who is one of the organizations that Apple's going to fund with the proceeds from these lawsuits.
That's right. It's Citizen Lab out of Toronto, I think, and then I can't remember what Amnesty's tech side is called, but anyway, Apple, yes, they're donating to both of those organizations, and then any money they win from the suit, they're going to donate to those organizations as well. So that's really a very good thing. As far as the expanded protections for children, there were three things going on here. The first is when somebody asks Apple's virtual assistant for either information about if they feel like they've been victimized by child exploitation, or if, on the other hand, they're going out looking for stuff that they shouldn't be looking for, if they're looking to basically victimize children. There's a whole new set of answers coming from Apple's virtual assistant and search that basically try to intercede, that try to direct people to resources that could help them, rather than just, serving them the information or, not knowing what the heck they're talking about. Absolutely nobody has any problem with that. The other two parts people had a couple of problems with. There was a thing that Apple has actually gone ahead and put in, where if on a kid's account, the child is either sending or receiving images that it looks like have nudity in them. Originally, Apple's plan was they were going to say to the kid, hey, are you sure you want to? And that was followed by, okay, but if you do, we're going to tell your parents. And a lot of people had a problem with that one because you don't know that the person controlling the family account is actually the parent. And then you're also just opening them up to a world of potential recrimination from the parent as well. It's kind of weird to me that that was the sticking point, but okay, Apple said, fine, we're going to go ahead and keep warning the kids. We're going to keep telling the kids it's okay. They don't need to look at this image. They don't need to send this image, but if they go ahead and do it anyway, that's between them and, whomever. Apple is not notifying the parents at this point. The other thing that really lit the internet's hair on fire is Apple is planning to match photos that are either stored in iCloud or photos that are uploaded to iCloud against child sexual abuse material, or CSAM as it's called. They're not going to be looking at the picture, but they're going to take the picture, they're going to turn it into a hash, they're going to have taken all of this other known CSAM, turn that into a hash as well. And so even though they're not laying the pictures over each other, they're laying the hashes over each other. And if those hashes match, they know pretty much what's in your picture. I'm surprised actually Apple is letting more of those than I would be comfortable letting through. There, I think 30 is the number they said, around 30. If you get around 30 of those in your iCloud account, then they're calling the cops. They got one or maybe two, because one could be an accident. It's just surprising to me they're going that high on that number. But anyway, Apple has gone ahead and they did the Siri thing and the search thing immediately. They, with 15.2, they did the thing where if a child is sending a picture that probably has nudity in it, they're going ahead and warning that child. And Apple has removed the part about CSAM from their website, but they're still doing it. So Apple actually, I think it was around the same day that the 15.2 update came out, so about a week ago as this is being recorded, they took that part off their website. And a lot of people assumed that that meant that Apple had backed down, that they had relented, that the people who were against it won. And then The Verge got in touch with, I want to say it was Shane Bauer, a spokesperson for Apple, I believe. And forgive me if I got that name wrong, but they got in touch with a spokesperson from Apple, and he was like, yeah, no, we just took it off the website. We're still doing it. The plan's still the plan. We're going to do that. Removing it from the website has nothing to do with it, which that's like amazing to me. I think it was Philip Elmer DeWitt over at Apple 3.0 who said, did Apple really think people wouldn't notice? And I don't think it's that. I think what Apple knows is that people are going to forget. People are going to forget, and it's going to happen without anybody even knowing. And if you're fine with that, you're fine with it. And if you're not fine with it, you're going to forget either that, or what's awful is then there started to be all these things like, so here's how you hide things you don't want Apple to know you have an iCloud. And I kind of don't want to let that information out because what they're fighting is awful. The question is how they're fighting it. Is that okay? So I don't know. Thoughts, Adam?
Well, what's a little amazing to me is that Apple's getting dinged for their transparency on this more than anything else.
Yeah.
Like other companies do this. Actually, Apple's been supposedly doing a form of this for a long time anyway, but Google does this, other companies do this, other photo services are doing these kinds of fingerprinting and scans and things like that, and ultimately it's for the greater good. Now obviously if you're big on privacy, this feels like a massive violation, and it's totally understandable. So it's definitely something worth debating. I think the biggest thing for me is that Apple brought it out in the open, and at least the conversation's happening, right, and people are thinking about this.
Forgive me for interrupting. If I could, I don't think, because I don't believe anybody was saying we don't want you looking for child pornography in iCloud. The problem that everyone is having, and this actually ties more back into the Apple is able to see the picture I'm about to send before I send it and say, hey, are you sure you want to send that? Where a lot of people are getting upset is, what about things that aren't illegal or that aren't illegal now? Things like Have you ever gone to a meeting of the Communist Party? Have you ever
Right.
gone to a protest or a rally or something like that, where now we know they can read signs and they can literally recognize people? Obviously, that's been a thing for a while. And then to scan that before it goes anyplace and say, like what kinds of things 5 years from now might they be hashing to match in iCloud, and how problematic would that be? That was the big issue. Nobody is going, hey, hands off my child pornography.
Well,
Probably some people are, but
and the related side of that obviously is that, the database that they're using now comes from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, right? The
right.
fingerprinting database that
Yes.
they're matching against. But the question then becomes, and especially in light of some of the information that came out about the deals that Apple did with China, is what does it take for an organization to say, well, I want you to match these fingerprints also because you're doing business in our country, and what have you. So the political economic pressures that could be put on Apple to look for other types of images, could be extreme. And so, yeah, these are very pertinent things to worry about, right? Like I'm not trying to minimize that in any way, shape, or form, but I do find that the particular, CSAM part of this story is, there's other companies that basically have been doing this and just haven't been transparent about it. And so Apple comes out and is very upfront and sort of says, we're going to start doing this, right? And they get the biggest reaction. So, and again, it makes sense because it's Apple, and they are a huge tech company.
Yeah. And they did also, as you say, I mean, it was their transparency. They came out and I mean, it's not like a secret reading 3 pages down or 5 pages down to the TOS. It is, hey, here's the thing we're going to do. Get ready.
Right.
So, yeah. Biggest thing, what would you, well, go ahead. I'm sorry. Are you moving to iPhone 13? Well, I think I'm done. I think I'm done. So with that part anyway. Yeah. Talk to me about
Definitely an
iPhone.
interesting story. I mean, my favorite part about this story is, NSO Group. I'll just wrap up with the NSO Group thing because I didn't really comment on that too much. So there's a great podcast called Darknet Diaries. Jack Rhysider is this great podcaster. If you want to know a lot more about this whole NSO Group thing, look into that. But basically the problem with this company is they're selling these software tools to nation states. They're claiming to kind of monitor it and say, oh, we don't allow them to do anything bad with it. But as we know, like Ken alluded to, governments, they get the software, they get the technology, they're going to use it how they're going to use it. And the policing is really kind of on the surface when it really comes down to it. And so the fact that Apple is taking a stand and going after these guys, for kind of what they've been doing, I think is something to, in my opinion, to be applauded, So I'm happy to see it happening. I mean, they're buying 0-day exploits off of the dark web, basically, and keeping them for themselves. So, finding 0-day exploits. So the fact that, we shut down forced entry, this no-click exploit that they use for messages, probably doesn't mean a lot to them because they have a stockpile of these things, of 0 days sitting out there to replace this one with the next one. So something has to be done to sort of stop this. And I thought this was a great story this year for Apple actually standing up and going after them, because they're not just targeting Apple, they're targeting everybody with this software. So that's all I have to say on that.
Cool.
All right, let's move back to something a little more fun, like hardware, right? Again, a lot of great hardware coming out from Apple this year.
Hey,
obviously,
Adam?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
You have a question?
Yeah, well, yeah, there were two questions in the chat.
Sorry.
Would you repeat the name of the podcast you just mentioned? Was one of them?
Yeah, it's called Darknet Diaries.
Okay, Darknet Diaries.
The host is a guy named Jack Rhysider.
Jack
Rhysider, R-Y, I'm going to mess up his name, R-Y-S-I-D-E-R, I believe.
S-I-D-E-R. Okay, thanks. And then somebody else, I'm just going to read this. It says, Adam, are you suggesting, as you did with the Ethernet example, that the reason Apple gave up inputs like USB and insisted on another plug-in was to save room within the MacBook Pro? And then I'm going to mute.
No, I don't think that. I think it came down to Apple's desire, from a design standpoint, to kind of put some form over function to a certain degree. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, to simplify the inputs when you just have one input mechanism, right? Apple kind of sees that as a simpler interface, but as we know, that turns into dongle town. So I think for pro users, it became sort of like we're trading one set of simplicity for a different kind of complexity, right? And it doesn't fit our workflows. So I think Apple sometimes thinks about the design and nice, pretty even symmetrical ports on the side of our thing, and this solves all the problems. And plus, we can still deliver all the connectivity with these dongles. But pro users look at it and go, this doesn't work for my workflow. I need to be able to plug in an SD card. I'm a pro photographer. Like this is how I work, and I don't want to have to carry around a million other things in my bag. So, but again, that's just my opinion on it. So I definitely what I applaud this year is Apple listening to the feedback from their pro community, which they don't often do, as we know. Sometimes Apple says my way or the highway, and that's just the way it is. But they rolled back things like the keyboard, they rolled back the port thing, and I think that shows a sign of somewhat changing Apple. I don't think they've gone all the way, right? They're always gonna make their choices, but in this regard, I think it was a good decision. Is that it? Cool.
I think that was it.
Yeah, you were, I interrupted you. You were going on to some more hardware stuff. So please go ahead.
No
now.
problem.
Sorry.
Yeah, somehow I think I lost my, there it is. Lost my notes. All right, yeah, so we were going to talk about new iPhones, right? New iPhones this year. Apple's been constantly updating their iPhones. I think a lot of people would probably say this was, going back to our earlier conversation, Ken, that this was more of an S year for iPhone. Even though it went from iPhone 12 to iPhone 13, we didn't see a major redesign of the device, and that usually is what signals when it's that sort of, what do they call it, super cell or super year or whatever. I always forget the terminology, but Apple came out with a whole new lineup: iPhone 13, iPhone 13 mini, iPhone 13 Pro Max. We got the new A15 Bionic chip. The big news there was a new 5-core GPU, improved wide-angle cameras, especially on the Pro models. We get new features like the cool cinematic mode, which does that adaptive focusing, which is a lot of fun. Also, again, going back to the Super Retina ProMotion displays, this was a big year for ProMotion, 120 hertz variable refresh rates. And then also kind of a big year for Apple in the hardware side of things with trying to bring ProRes. So we got ProRes video support coming to the Pro model as well. So I don't have a whole lot on iPhone. Again, it was kind of an S year, iterative year. I think a lot of folks are looking to see more happen with the iPhone 14. I think the latest news on that was like this week. There seems to be some indication that we might get a huge jump in megapixels on the wide angle camera, 48 megapixels, up from, I want to say the current is 12. So pretty big leap.
It kind of goes back to the question I was asking you earlier about, can you tell, like, an upgrade cycle year? I mean, are we not to the place, kind of like I always think we are with the Mac, where it's like, oh, it's time for me to get a new iPhone. I'm going to get the best iPhone, or the best iPhone for me. I mean, we both know people, you might even be one, I can't remember, who buy iPhones every year.
Yeah, I get one every year.
Okay. I get one. I probably would have skipped this year if we hadn't already promised the phones that we have to, or had to, kids down the line,
right?
Basically. That said, 5G is a game changer, and nobody has actually been able to say clearly why 5G is such a game changer, because you say it's faster. And it's like, well, but it's already fast enough, so it's fine. I notice a difference with my 5G, but nobody has been able to say that well enough to me to make me want to buy it. because I didn't
Right.
get to 12. And if I hadn't promised my phone away, if I hadn't promised my 11 away, like I say, I wouldn't have gotten the 13. And yet I love it. It still feels like a new phone 4 or 5 months
Yeah.
later.
I think the really interesting thing with iPhone and 5G is actually more happening probably in 2022. And it was, reports coming out this year. We're expecting an update to the entry level iPhone SE, the iPhone SE2, which is, Apple's 4.7-inch model. From a hardware perspective, it's not very exciting, right? It's the same design as basically, I think, an iPhone 7, I want to say. So you still got the Touch ID, you still got 4.7-inch display, but they're expecting a processor update to like an A15, maybe an A14, depending, but it's going to get 5G. And because it's that entry level model, there's a huge potential for Android switchers. And so they're expecting that to sell really, really well. And, I think, again, 5G, there's a lot of people that were early adopters this year with, from Apple. Obviously, with Android devices, they were in much earlier. But now that 5G rollouts are wider spread, I think that's where you're going to see, more people moving to 5G this year. So I think, again, that also adds to this, like, S year, super selling year, super sell year, or whatever they call it, right?
Super cycle. I think you're looking for
super
super
cycle.
cycle.
That's the
Yeah.
word I'm looking for. Yeah. So iPhone 14 may be a super cycle year for a number of reasons, including some of the COVID things and supply chain things you were talking about, because it turned out because there was a shortage, there's a theory that because there was a shortage of iPhone 13s, Apple couldn't meet demand. Obviously, you couldn't get in early. So now you're looking like, oh, well, am I going to buy an iPhone 13 in 2022 when I know I can get a 14 in a few months? And so a lot of people there's a feeling a lot of people might just hold off. And so that will, again, contribute to that super cycle.
It's interesting, actually. I like that you're talking about the iPhone 14, because the next thing I wanted to talk about were the imaginary products that have like really driven people crazy this year. Going back again, looking over the scripts for this year, in preparation for tonight. Actually, I skipped a part that I wanted to do. I got to interview Michael Gartenberg long before he worked for Apple, back when he was still working for Jupiter Research or whoever it was, around 2009. And I asked him about something like, couldn't Apple one day do this thing or whatever? And he said, nothing will ever be better than the imaginary Apple product. And that's what we've got now. I mean, all the excitement around the car, which the first 3 months, and I had totally forgotten this, but the first 3 months of 2021 were, oh man, Apple's about to partner with Hyundai. Wait, no, they're not going to partner with Hyundai. They're partnering with Magna. And there's a car plant that's not doing anything down in Georgia, and Apple's about to start there, and they're going to start rolling cars off the line. I think it was about 100,000 a year starting in 2023 or 2024. And of course, all that just, completely vanished. And yet all throughout the year, we're still getting Apple car stories. 50% of the time it's about, oh, so-and-so left. It's obvious there's a brain drain at Apple in the car and the whole thing's going to fall apart. And the other 50% is you should see one driving down the street in the next 2 to 3 years. The thing that I'm most excited about, and this is just my own nerdery, but it's been more and more of a thing lately, more and more of a talking point lately, is Apple getting into AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, with a mixed reality headset. Ming-Chi Kuo said at this time last year that it was going to happen in 2021. He has since come out and said it's going to happen by the second quarter of 2022. Wait, scratch that. Fourth quarter of 2022, but he's got reasons each time for why. And if you're wondering what the reasons are, pick up any paper, because the supply chain over the past few months and the chip shortage as well have both been kind of insane. The thing that was really fun, and I mentioned this earlier, Morgan Stanley analyst Katie Hubert, he said, right, it's time to start thinking, if you're going to invest in Apple, it's time to start thinking about Apple Car, and it's time to start thinking about augmented reality and virtual reality. These are things that Apple's going to get into. And if you think it's silly to think about those things, she said in 2014, Apple did not have a wearables business. Today, Apple's wearables business is the size of a Fortune 120 company. 5 years ago, people weren't sure that Apple was going to be able to make any kind of headway in services. Their services segment is now a $70 billion annual revenue driver, doubling over the past 4 years. Of course, she would be the first to say what everybody says: past performance is not indicative of future results. But we know Apple is getting into a car, she says, and we know they're getting into augmented reality and virtual reality, and it's time to start thinking about that when you think about investing. I don't own any Apple shares. I'm just excited that she's excited enough about that to say, right, that's a real thing that's happening. And pay attention to that, because I'm a nerd and I want an AR VR helmet, not one to go out walking with, one to sit around my house with, but the AR VR helmet that you sit around your house with eventually gets you to the glasses that you can go walking down the street with, I think. It's always kind of weird to me that other people don't get as excited about augmented reality and virtual reality as I do. And especially, or they don't get as excited about it as they do about the car. But I think it's because we all understand cars. Adam and I were talking earlier this week. He's not 100% certain what his use case would be for augmented reality.
Yep.
And I am not sure what my use case for augmented reality would be either, but I'm really excited about it. I mean, go back to when the first iPhone came out, there were so many people who were like, well, I don't need that. I just need my phone to make phone calls. I met somebody in 2016 who was very proud of the fact that she still only had a flip phone, because all she needs her phone to do to make phone calls. And otherwise, I mean, we all get the value, I think, of a smartphone. That to me is what AR is going to do for us at some point. We're not necessarily going to know why when we initially get it. But you look at things like there was a report about a month ago, I think, that said that Apple over the next 10 years would like to replace iPhone with augmented reality. You have Tim Cook saying things like augmented reality is going to be a thing where one day we're not going to understand how we lived without it, the same way today we don't understand how we live without a smartphone. It's all really exciting. I think it needs to get in the hands of developers. I think the AR, VR mixed reality thing is basically going to be, Adam actually had one of my favorite quotes years ago. We are Apple's test kitchen, but we're paying a ton of money to be Apple's test kitchen. And I'm lining up. I mean, I said the other day on macOS Ken, shut up and take my money, because I'm ready to be the guinea pig on this thing, because between my excitement about it for I don't even know how many years now, Tim Cook's stated excitement about it, you can't get him to state excitement about cars. You can't get him to state excitement about crypto. You can't get him to state excitement a lot of times, but just mention augmented reality. And that's the next minute of Tim Cook talking about how amazing that's going to be and how excited he is about it. And yet we haven't seen what Apple's going to do. Fingers crossed it's 2022. I would have bet on 2021, but the fascinating thing to me is how things that don't even exist yet ended up being two of the biggest stories for Apple in 2021. Are you going to talk about the hardware of AirTags, or are you going to talk about the problem with AirTags?
The problem with AirTags? No, I was more going to focus on the hardware.
Cool.
Yeah. So, when we were talking about this, we kind of thought it was interesting to transition kind of from the more broad technology to the more personal technology. And arguably one of the most personal technologies that Apple introduced in 2021 was their AirTag. They're literally called personal item trackers. They, are for tracking your things like your keys or your wallet or anything, your bag, anything you can actually attach them to. And they leverage Apple's another one of Apple's designed chips, the U1, which is their ultra wideband technology, which has cool things like the closer that you get to the item, you can actually really track the distance and the position. So that really aids in finding something like your keys. They have a built-in speaker. Interestingly, it's a product from Apple that actually includes a user replaceable battery. So you can actually open it up, put your battery in there. It leverages Apple's Find My network, which is really cool because it actually it uses a mesh network basically when you lose your device to take advantage of the billions of Apple devices that are out in the world to help you find your item again, right? It finds nearby Apple devices that are connected to the internet, and basically phones home in a secure manner that Apple has put together. So you can find your item that way. Also, if you happen to pawn somebody's lost AirTag item, you can use the NFC in your phone to tap it, and it can bring up the contact information so you can return it to your owner. Obviously, now we're dealing with some potential security issues around the trackers, but Apple tried to compensate for that as well. They built in, a feature where if an unknown, quote unquote, unknown AirTag or an AirTag that's not tied to your phone is somehow attached to you or following you around, it will actually notify you, give you the ability to disable it, and be aware that you are being tracked. So yeah, definitely a very personal piece of technology, and sort of leveraging a lot of the other bits and pieces that Apple have built over the years with their cloud and their chip technologies and those sorts of things. So that was another big item of 2021 from a hardware perspective.
If we were doing this a week from now, I wonder if you might either change or add a HomePod Mini. Because there's a story that's actually going to be, as we sit here and do this live, there's a story that's going to be on macOS Ken tomorrow that they've apparently doubled their share of the smart speaker market. Strategy Analytics says it was like 5% last year. It's 10% this year.
Wow.
And everybody credits the $99 HomePod Mini, because before that, Apple's smart speaker was $400. And it turns out you can get a bigger piece of the pie if you make the pie cheaper.
I think Apple learned that with the iPod, right?
Yeah.
So they kept getting smaller and cheaper and more affordable to more people. I think feature set also really, really helps, right? I think they've really kind of expanded what you can do with a HomePod, expanded series capabilities and those sorts of things. I love my HomePods. I love my original HomePod, and I do definitely have a HomePod Mini. And some of the cool things like the NFC technology, the ability to, if I'm listening to a song on my HomePod, move my iPhone just over to it, and magically it transfers that song immediately to my iPhone, and then I can walk out the house and continue listening to my music. It's kind of just like one of those magical experiences that Apple was able to create with their hardware and software integration. And little things like that feel gimmicky, but they also, I think, sell products, right? It's just like, that's really cool.
Yeah. Really quickly, there were some honorable mention stories that we wanted to mention, because the one thing that I was thinking about, like if you had gotten two other people up here to talk about this, there are other stories that would have been their most important for the year, the number one story for them for the year. Apple's move in the Racial Equity and Justice Initiative, I think, is huge for a number of cities around the country, and also their entrepreneur camps, where they're bringing people to Cupertino. Well, they're probably not bringing people to Cupertino now, but they're reaching out to marginalized communities and saying, yes, we're going to give you the kind of training that you might not have been able to have before. We're going to give you the kind of network that you might not have been able to have before. I'm thinking about the entrepreneur camps for women and entrepreneur camps for Black founders and things like that. That's huge. The epic Fortnite fight with Apple, both Adam and I were like, I can't. I can't. So we didn't. Fitness Plus, I mean, could be huge. And of course, the sentiment against Apple from various governments, both, here in North America and around the world, is always fun to follow. The one thing that we both did want to talk about, though, to wrap up, was Apple TV Plus. And there's
the little streaming network that could.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's tiny, and I know it doesn't have nearly the subscribers as others do, even though it costs less than most of the others without ads and without tracking you. I was kind of annoyed when, before they even officially announced Apple TV Plus, word was that they were going after content that would win awards. And I thought, well, that's shallow. And then I realized, well, no, that's how quality is recognized, by awarding it. And they won a ton of awards. You actually had, I thought you had numbers. You had numbers, did you not?
I had a few. I mean, I was just highlighting some of the awards that they did win, AFI awards, Critics' Choice Awards. Biggest one probably, especially since a lot of the content is TV content, 11 Emmy Awards they won this past year. I think you had the total numbers, but 7 alone for Ted Lasso, which was an incredible series. And actually won for Outstanding Comedy Series. Probably one of my favorite series on Apple TV Plus. But I think the point behind that is like, I have found, I have all the streaming services. I have access to, HBO, I have Netflix, I have Amazon, I have Apple TV Plus, I have Hulu. And I find myself coming back to Apple TV's content over and over again, I think for the quality. Servant is a show that I got into. I love Dickinson. The movie content, that the banker, the Tom Hanks Hitch thing, I was wonderful. That I think it's called Hitch,
Finch.
right? I'm getting that right. Finch, sorry. Hitch is the Will Smith one, I think. Yeah, Finch, which was wonderful. And Greyhound, I thought was a great movie as well. And I hate to say that I have not seen Coda yet. I'm waiting to watch that with my daughter, who's a huge film buff, but she's just been too busy to sit down and watch it with me. So, and that also has won amazing accolades and awards. So, that focus on quality over quantity, I think, has served it very well. And I, again, personally find myself coming back to it, over and over again, not for its lack of content, but just because I keep just hearing great things about the shows that are on there.
Yeah. According to Apple's press releases, and this of course will change over the next month because we're in award season now, 183 wins and 672 award nominations. That's across everything that they might have won an award for. That's what they won. That's what they're up for. Acting award nominations currently, Denzel Washington, Billy Crudup, Mark Duplass, Jennifer Aniston, nearly the whole cast of Ted Lasso. Anytime there's anything they might win. And nearly the whole cast of Coda, which Adam just mentioned as well. Outside of the individual awards, though, the things that I'm most impressed with are the Peabody Awards that they won this year. And they won those for Stillwater and Ted Lasso. I feel like, in the same way that Adam feels like he should watch Coda, and so do I feel like I should watch Coda, that is, because I still haven't yet either. I really feel like I should watch all the kids stuff because they're doing a ton of kids programming, none of which is trying to sell you a toy. And the fact that they actually have a kids program, if you don't know what Stillwater is, it's based on a series of books, and it's about mindfulness, and it's about sort of calming yourself. And that's, most things that we aim at kids, it's a guy with a sword and somebody else with a laser, and they're all like running after each other and trying to save the world. And next week they'll do it again, right? Or tomorrow afternoon at 4:30 they'll do it again. And that they have a kid show that's all about making sure that you're emotionally okay. That's mind blowing to me. And then of course Ted Lasso also won a Peabody, and I have sort of the same place in my heart for Ted Lasso that Adam has. But my favorite part is I have a friend who just got tired of listening to me talk about it, and then he watched it, and he was like, he was kind of embarrassed. He's like, it's made me better. I mean, he actually took some of what he had seen there and felt like he was being more kind to people. He was being more considerate of people. And when Tim Cook introduced Apple TV Plus, what he led off with was the phrase, "Great stories can change the world." And not everything they have is going to do that, but they have a few that are. And I know because my friend told me that it changed his. So that's kind of incredible. Hopefully, Apple TV Plus is, the biggest story of 2022 as well. If they keep doing the same kind of quality content, that they keep doing the same kinds of stuff that really does have a good purpose, that'd be great to see. And
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I mean, I didn't watch Ted Lasso till you told me to. So.
Oh, really? Was it me?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was you.
Well,
We were on a podcast, and I said I haven't seen it yet, and you said you need to.
Yeah.
And I said,
Well,
I
there,
know, and I immediately went and did it.
yeah,
So
I think actually I wish Apple had an affiliate program because I've turned a few people on to Ted Lasso. I'm sorry, Apple TV Plus. I wish that had an affiliate program because boy, that 50 cents would just be burning a hole in my pocket right now. Anyway, I think that's all I have. Did you have anything else, sir?
yeah, no,
All
open
right.
for comments, questions, or what have you.
Okay, everyone, unmute if you like and ask questions.
An interesting thought occurred to me on some of the hardware. A
Yeah.
lot of the advantage that seems to have been gained this year on using like the M1 chips and getting into the Apple Silicon, on the one hand, has been the incredibly better battery life that it's been giving. But there's also been a lot of commentary about the much higher amount of processing power that things have. However, that processing power is really seems to be oriented towards multiple cores and parallel processing. A lot of that is going to require the apps to make better use of that. Do either of you see any serious embracing of that in more than the professional programs out there?
You know, I think that's really going to come down to the application and the developers and what you're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, the interesting thing about that, right, is like from a single core perspective, there's almost, I think, maybe even literally no difference between an M1 and an M1 Pro Max. It's like incredibly close, if not identical, from what I remember from some of the benchmarks and the tests and stuff like that. And so it comes back to the question of like, how fast do you need your word processor to be? Like, like where do you gain advantage from taking advantage, moving to multi-core? And that ultimately really comes down to the application, and I think the developer to kind of decide on that. And it's really a testament to some of the things I think Ken even mentioned or alluded to earlier, where it's just like, what application are you using, and what system and what machine do you actually need to be productive with that application? So it's an interesting thing to think about, and you're definitely right. Like, I mean, it's multi-core, it's GPU acceleration where we're seeing the most performance gains, and that tends to lend itself towards more the pro applications. There are applications in terms of like, I think where we see more performance increases on the consumer side is with the neural engine stuff. And there were improvements, we just kind of glossed over them, to like the neural engines and those sorts of things, and machine learning, right? And so the ability to do things like analyze images or analyze audio or find things with machine learning and smarts and stuff like that. And that's probably also glossed over and probably more applicable to more of the consumer applications, I think, than the processor, GPU, multi-core stuff.
If all this stuff is more
Suggesting that maybe
accessible,
where everything is, suggesting that where everything is going to be much more towards the things that can be done in the background, to help on the natural language or the intuitive knowledge of of what you might want to actually do with your machine. Right.
the only thing I was going to say really quickly, and this is my guess, because I have no clear idea, except I think about the things that like come on your Mac now that used to be pro apps. So, I mean, the kind of question that you're asking, it feels to me sort of like, once this becomes a playground on which everybody can play, then all of a sudden people start taking more advantage of that, right? I mean, what we think of today as a pro application, Final Cut Pro costs $300. $300. That used to be a room. That used to be a room that you had to go to, and you had to hire people and you had to do stuff. And now Final Cut Pro is $300, and it's still pro, but anybody can have it for $300. So, I mean, and I know Final Cut Pro doesn't take advantage of all the stuff that you're talking about, although I imagine it actually does take advantage of quite a bit of it. But I mean, it feels to me, and this is the reason that I think I frustrated Adam so much, because what I wanted was a specific. of what a Mac Pro might do, because I know Adam is really excited about the possibility of a Mac Pro. And I think what Adam is excited about is sort of the same thing that I've just kind of come to expect, that as our hardware gets more power, the applications that get handed to me have more power. And I may only use a tenth of the power that's handed to me, but somebody else might have greater uses for it. I don't know if that makes sense.
I might be able to distill that answer for you too. But like, I think for me, the excitement comes down to the thing that excited me from the very beginning about using a Mac, and that's and I've talked about this a lot. It's the idea of the technology moving away and getting out of the way of the creative process. And so the more power that creative professionals have, in terms, like I said, of not having to wait for things, to just have a vision and go, I want to do that, and just doing it, and not having the technological barriers of, I have to wait 3 minutes while that renders, or I have to wait to realize that vision. When that fades away, it's the creativity that then gets to excel. Not that it's being hindered a lot right now, like we have more creativity and more options with our technology now, but the better and better that it gets, the more that fades away, right? And the more we get to the idea of, I have an idea and I realize the vision. That's it. There's nothing in between. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It does.
That's a cool world to think about, right? Like, I think it, I envision it, and I create it, and it's there.
Other questions?
Ken,
Hmm.
I have the same sense, the same thing you just described in terms of your question for Adam, I have for you about the AR VR.
Mm-hmm.
I can't make any, I mean, I'm not unenthused about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I have an absolute blank about why in the world anyone would want it. I'm sure it will, I didn't know why anyone would want an iPhone either, so I'm not, but eh?
Yeah, so the rumors, and I did this story yesterday, I think on macOS Con, or today on macOS Con. The rumors on the AR VR headset are that it's going to have, one of the things I'm most excited about is it's going to have 15 cameras. And I don't really like the idea of having that many cameras or that many optical sensors on something that's, in my home, especially when I'm not looking at it. But I would imagine going back to Adam's joke years ago about how we're part of their paid developer program. I think this is just guess, this is just speculation. I think that what Apple is going to do is they'll come out with an AR VR headset, if those rumors are true. And mostly what people are going to be excited about is going to be VR. Mostly what people are going to be excited about is all the game developers who have lived in the App Store for years and have either been on like this screen, or once it moved to the TV, this screen. Right now, they're going to be able to do this thing that right now is really owned by Facebook and by people who want to work with Facebook. But we're all going to have this helmet that's also going to have all these cameras, and somebody's going to have some idea of fun things you can do with that. So they're going to be developing for AR as well, and it's only going to be in the home. But Apple wants a pair of glasses like the ones Adam is wearing, glasses that you wouldn't feel stupid walking down the street in, right? That are going to do the AR thing. But if they introduce it, you've almost got the same problem that you had with apps for the Apple Watch. Apps for the Apple Watch were a thing that everybody was really excited about. I know there are still some that are out there, but it didn't become the kind of app playground that a lot of people expected or hoped it would. And I don't think they want to introduce glasses like Apple's and then say, or glasses like Adam's, excuse me, and then say, okay, everybody now go make us apps. I think they want people making apps with this mixed reality headset, so that when the technology catches up to that vision of just being able to go out with that, oh, and you're already using the apps around the house. There are already 5,000 of them. Developers already know how to do AR at that point. It's just being able to take it outside the house and do it. So I am exactly where you are on AR. I don't know, but I know I'm excited to see what happens with it. I'm excited to see, what people do. I tend to go more in sort of the games area, or more in sort of the history area, or, putting art places where art isn't, or letting me buy a wall. And this will be terrible as far as advertising and stuff like that, but let me buy a wall that's on somebody's walk, and then I can put, my name, or, just paint "have a nice day" or something like that if people are in that app environment. I mean, the ideas, the possibilities are not limitless, but the possibilities are so huge that it's kind of hard to get my head around it. I'm assuming that we're going to have 3 or 4 years of people playing with it to find out before it becomes a make or break thing, before that piece of hardware, the eyeglasses, before that becomes a make or break thing. For Apple, I think we'll have a long time of people figuring out what they would do with it once they went outside with it.
Okay.
I've more fallen prey to modern sci-fi, and I have been talking about this on my podcast recently because I need people to basically talk me off the ledge, because my concern is that in the age of COVID and social distancing and stuff like that, like, we're steps away from the Matrix, or the Oasis or something like that, and we're going to go all potentially take this technology and move further inward. And I realize it has great potential to do exactly the opposite, and that's where a lot of people see it. Will that be the reality? I don't know. That's that's when I start thinking about the applications. It's like, are we all just going to go into this virtual world and then never want to come out because we feel like it's funner or better or
No germs.
more enjoyable than what's going on out here?
Well, that's depressing.
I know. I don't want to get depressing. Like, that's why I need people to tell me, no, Adam, it's really going to be okay.
I'll take you another way. I got to, so a few years ago when I was working with Roddenberry, I got to be part of a museum that they built inside a virtual reality startup called Sansar. And what was really neat about it was all this stuff that we've all seen on screen. Either the Roddenberry organization or some other people actually had that stuff. And so they went and they got the highest resolution photography of it that they could. And then all of a sudden, you are standing next to this costume or this bit of wardrobe that you've seen on screen forever. And the thing that's amazing about well done VR is you can get close enough to see where at one point Shatner pulled a thread on his jacket, or somebody else did some other time, but you can lean in that close to really get, and of course you're leaning in physical world, but you're not near anything.
Right.
And so Sansar also had a wonderful thing where you could go to a tomb, not like a full pyramid, but some scientific organization had completely, captured in as high a detail as they possibly could a tomb that was 4,000 years old. I'd never be allowed to go in there, but I can go in there virtually. And again, you can get this close to the wall and see the marks that some guy with a chisel made 4,000 years ago. And I'm never going to get to Egypt. If they brought that around in a museum, you'd still be 6 feet away and you can't get near it. And here's a blow up of it, or you can virtually be, right there next to it. The possibilities for education, for experience. And obviously, the real experience is being with the thing. The real experience is being able to, get as close to touching the thing as you can or standing next to it.
Okay.
Most of us aren't. So it would be wonderful to see that happen.
Yeah, we're actually way over time, which is partially my fault because I'm usually the timekeeper.
Sorry about that.
That's not your fault. It's me. That's, I'm still sitting here asking questions. So, but I do want to, say that. So, it's interesting. You have reminded me of things that would have some appeal.
I would like to see Apple come out with hearing aids. Because they already are about 9/10 there. It's just a matter that they have to modify some of the hardware and stuff like that. Now, I have trouble hearing, And they've got, this digital stuff, and it's pretty sophisticated. But I would just like to see them come out with hearing aids with all of the bells and whistles on it.
I think that would be possible as just a software modification to the existing AirPods.
AirPods.
That's right.
Mhm.
Are hearing aids regulated by the FDA?
Yes.
At this
Okay.
point in time, but it's changing.
Okay. It would be a wonderful thing to see, especially because what is it? It's conversation boost, I believe, is one of the things that they have. I
Yeah.
mean, they're not, that's obviously not a replacement for a hearing aid, but they're already flirting with that idea, obviously, of like, you could use this to help in this situation. There's also, isn't there like a conversation boost is what I'm thinking of, where if I'm looking
Right.
at you and you're talking to me, it'll sort of drown out the rest of the noise.
Yeah, it
And-
uses the directional microphones to help do that thing. Then another feature that they have that I actually did because I developed a little bit of tinnitus and some hearing issues is they have the ability now with your AirPods you can basically take a hearing test, take that profile and plug it into your AirPods, like consume that, and it will adjust the EQ and the balance and stuff like that for specifically your hearing.
And I would like to see that when you run the test before you make the modification, run the test again and see if the outline flattens the way it should.
Right. I do know that when you import it, you do have the ability to you can switch back and forth, so you can see without the enhancement and with the enhancement and decide if that. And I think you can also manually tune that too. It's all part of their accessibility settings.
Today, they give you the test before they put it into your hearing aids, but they never give you that test afterwards to see if it really works.
I know that Apple has actually put in some amount of standardization to work with a few of the hearing aid standards out there.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there have been a few of the hearing aid companies that have specifically added AirPlay into their hearing aids and are possibly going so far. I'm actually seeing, for instance, an Engadget article from last month that says that Apple is collaborating with a Danish company specifically to, I guess, co-process hearing aid stuff between the aids and, say, your iPhone.
Yeah. Well, like hearing aids usually have two microphones, the good ones. They have one's forward and one's behind. And so a lot of times when you're in a restaurant, they pick up the background noise and they use it for canceling the signal when it mixes and comes under your ear. They use the front one as a microphone and the back one is a blocking of background noise. Because one of the problems you have is like if you're watching TV and then your wife is talking to you, you can't hear her because this TV is making so much noise and overloading the system that it's hard to hear her.
Then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Anyway, I just like to, hear your thoughts on that.
I personally, I think the best thing that Apple is doing, and I think Tim Cook has actually said it too, that's what Apple is going to be remembered for, is the work that they're doing in medicine. I tell a story on a couple of shows that I do of kind of getting into it with a VC a couple of years ago. Not getting into it, we were friends. It was all very playful, but she was really upset that Amazon was doing well, that Blue Origin was going to space, and that Richard Branson was going to space, and Elon Musk was going to space, and Tim Cook was just sitting on all of Apple's money. They're just sitting on all of Apple's money. And I immediately said, what they're doing in medicine, or what their possibilities that they could do in medicine is I won't say it's more important, but if Tim Cook goes outside and looks up and sees Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Richard Branson flying overhead, why does Tim Cook need to go there? In the meantime, I feel certain that each of those companies is doing something towards medicine, but Apple is doing, I think, really important stuff. Health records. I had a family member who nearly died because when he went to the hospital, he had been to the same hospital a couple of weeks earlier. and they assumed that nothing had changed. So they didn't bother looking at his paper health records, but it turns out his medication had actually changed in the time that he hadn't been there. So they put him back on old meds he had been on before, and he started getting significantly worse. Lengthen the time in the hospital. And if we could get to a point where the first thing that happens when somebody comes in, they say, right, let's get your latest information, right? And if that's something that we're all carrying around instead of relying on somebody from one, office to send it over to somebody else and make sure it didn't get lost in the pile and make sure they see that. I mean, that to me is huge. And if they can just build that into the thing I'm getting anyway, because I want to, have the latest iPhone, that's, I hope he's right.
Yeah.
I hope he's right that that's what Apple is going to be remembered for. And it's weird to think there's going to be a day where people are going to look back on Apple, but I hope he's right that that's the thing that they're remembered for, that that's their contribution, because Lord knows we need something.
I think we should probably close, and that's a wonderful note to close on, and let you guys get out of here, and wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and huge thank yous for all you have said, all the goodies you have offered to us tonight. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for thanks for letting us come in and play. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thanks.